Well, welcome back. This is part 2 of last week's video. So if you have not seen last week's video, definitely go and check that out. But I'm doing 2 videos to go through the financial offer terms that a buyer needs to submit to a seller when they put in the offer. And these terms I'm about to share with you are also pretty important. So stick around. Hey everyone, my name is Danae Hewitt and I'm your go-to DFW Realtor here in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex. So let's talk about this offer. When a buyer puts in an offer, they need to outline all of the financial terms that they are offering, not just the sales price, all right? Not just the sales price. So last week's video, I went through the 1 to 4 family residential contract where financial terms need to be discussed. So the next 2 terms I'm going to talk about are if the home is in an HOA, then there are going to be HOA transfer fees, and the possession of the property. If the buyers are taking possession of the property after closing and the seller gets to stay in the house for a little bit after closing, then there are some financial terms that we need to discuss. And both of those are going to be in the form of the HOA addendum and the seller's temporary residential leaseback. Okay, let's get into it. So the first one is if the property is in a mandatory HOA association. If there are some properties out here that are not in an HOA or they're in a voluntary HOA, then this document does not work. It has to be a mandatory property owners association. All right, so there's a lot of fees, a lot of HOA transfer fees. So who's going to pay for them? The first one is the resale certificate. The resale certificate is a document that the management company is going to fill out, and they're going to talk about how much money they have in reserves right now. They're going to talk about any violations that the seller might have on the property, like let's say their fence is stained the wrong color. Yeah, I don't know. They're also going to talk about if the seller has any unpaid HOA dues. So that document needs to be delivered to the buyers so that they know what they're getting into when they purchase this house. They're also going to give to the buyers the CC&Rs, which go over all of the rules and restrictions that the HOA has. So all that information needs to be sent over to the buyers. And that's the expense. And there's a cost associated with that. Recently, there was a law that passed that actually capped what a property management company can charge for a resale certificate. And they capped it at $375. And guess what most resale certificates are, you guys? Isn't that magical? They're $375. Isn't that crazy? Because that's the cap. Get me? Get my sarcasm there? I'm just kidding. I've actually seen the resale certificate it was like $250 on a property recently, but it was a condo, so maybe that had a little something to do with it. But anyways, just expect to pay $375 for that resale certificate. So who's gonna pay for it? I will say typically a seller does pay for it because it has to be paid for right up front. The HOA companies, they don't take payment at closing, okay? And in the contract, these documents have to be delivered to the buyers. So why would the buyer pay for something on a house that they may not end up purchasing? So typically that resale certificate is going to be paid for by the seller. But if a buyer is desperate and there are multiple offers and they just want to make sure that they get this house, then they say, sure, I'll pay $375 up front, and hopefully I still move forward with the property. So you never know, just throwing that out there. The next cost is other things that the HOA can charge for that are not the resale certificate and not delivery of the CC&R. They could be things like a credit card authorization fee. I'm not kidding you. I actually saw an association do this where it was a one-time fee of, I think it was like $500, and it went into a separate management fund, and it actually gave scholarships to kids that lived in that subdivision. Okay, that's pretty cool. I like that. But that's another fee, may or may not be with their association. So what I like to do, whether I'm helping a seller sell a house or helping a buyer buy a house, is I call the property management company and I say, tell me all your fees. Okay, tell me all your fees. Because how that paragraph reads when the buyer submits the offer is it says that the buyer is going to pay X number of dollars towards any extra fees, and the seller pays the difference. So let's say the extra fees are $300 and the buyer puts in $50. They're going to pay $50, and I'm representing the seller. I'm going to say, Mr. Seller, you have to pay an extra $250 because I did my research. Do you like that number? Yes or no? Do you want to negotiate? Yes or no? Are you cool? Okay, so it's really good that your agent knows how much those fees are. So you as a buyer, you're making your offer competitive, let's say, or as a seller, if I'm accepting an offer, I need to make sure that what you're going to pay me for is going to be worth it, because the fees are a much higher amount than what you're offering. So that's why you definitely need to know how much all these extra little fees are with the HOA companies. The last fee is the cost for the title company to work with the HOA company to deliver all these documents and give all these documents. We have to pay the title company for that. So who is going to pay for that? That number is actually going to be a little tough to get because it varies from title companies and how much they're going to charge. So it's not a crazy dollar amount, maybe $100 or so, but hey, who's going to pay for it? So those are the 3 sections on that HOA document where the buyer needs to present to the seller and say that they're willing to pay how much money and they're willing to pay this title company fee, so that the seller knows approximately what they're paying for when it comes to transferring the HOA out of their name into the new buyer's name. The next part that I told you we would talk about is when the buyers take possession of the house. So if they're not taking possession the day of closing, if they're letting the seller stay in the house for, let's say, 3 days, just to give them time to pack and really get everything out of the house, do some cleaning. Maybe they're letting the seller stay for 2 weeks. Or maybe they're letting the seller stay for 30 days. All right, so then we have to put a dollar amount on stuff like that. You can put a dollar amount on 3 days. That is totally up to you. I would say it's kind of customary to give the sellers 3 days at no charge, but let's get into that. How the document reads is the buyer, who is now the owner of the house, so they are now the landlord on the document. Follow me there? So how much is the tenant, the seller is now the tenant of the property, how much is the tenant going to pay the landlord? And how that writes in the contract is they're going to be paying a daily amount, because typically people aren't staying for 30 days, they're not staying for a month, so we give a daily amount. So maybe you're charging them $50 a day to stay in the house for, X number of days that they are in the house. And the number of days that they stay in the house is of course outlined in the contract as well. But there isn't a financial thing for that, so I didn't bring that up. But if they're gonna be staying in the house for 5 days at $50, then we need to put that amount in this contract. Now the next is a deposit. Is the landlord going to charge the tenant a deposit for staying in the property for that 5 days? And that's totally going to be up to you to have that conversation with your agent. Should you charge them a deposit? Should you not charge them a deposit? Totally up to you. But that deposit, if there is nothing wrong with the house, if those sellers leave the house in pristine condition and you charge them a deposit, then you need to return it back to them within 30 days, the full amount. If there is some damage to the property and you did take a deposit, then whatever the cost is to repair that damage, you're going to take out of that deposit. So you need to send them that receipt and the remainder of that deposit. And if that repair is more than the deposit, then that's when you need to reach out to the tenant and let them know what had happened, because you will have their contact information. Let them know what happened, take pictures of it. You just really want to make sure that you document things when we're in this lease back, especially if there's any damage to the house. So the next part is what we call the holding over paragraph. So this is if you give the tenants of the house 5 days to stay in the property and they don't leave on day 5, they leave on day 10. Well, in that paragraph, you say that you're going to charge them a certain dollar amount past 5 days before you can actually take possession of the property because they didn't get their butts out of the house. So you want this number to sting a little bit. And for a seller looking at the house, yeah, this number is probably going to sting because you want it to be more than the cost of a hotel. If they only charge $50 and I'm like frantic and it's 8 o'clock on day 5 and I can't get out of the house and oh, well, it's only $50? Okay, I'll stay one more day and make sure I can get everything done. But if it's $300, I might be calling my friends at 8 o'clock and telling them to come over and help me. Okay, so you want that number to sting a little bit if you're putting in that offer. All right, but as a seller, just know that number probably is gonna hurt. You don't want to pay that dollar amount. Okay, so make sure you're out of the house when the term ends on this contract. So let's do a quick recap of both videos. In the first video, we talked about the cost of the sales price, the title policy, the survey, the shortages in the area, seller concessions, and a home warranty. And in this part, we talked about if there is an HOA, what those costs are, and if the buyer is going to take possession 5 days after the house closes. All these terms are financial terms that are going to make the buyer pay more money, let's say, or the seller is going to net less money, depending on what that buyer offers. So all this information is really good info for you to have if they are specific to you when you are putting an offer in on a house or accepting an offer on your house. I hope you guys got some value out of this video. Please let me know if you did in the description below, and I will see you guys next week.